Hey there, thank you very much for joining me again. Today I am going to be talking about the stock plugins and the stock mixing capabilities within Cubase and sort of contrast that with third-party, more expensive premium plugins. I know that I've talked about a variety of plugins on my channel before, and I wanted to offer some perspective for people who maybe are investing in Cubase. They want to understand if these tools are really professional grade, and also for people who maybe are experienced with Cubase to get some sort of perspective on, where these tools that come with your Cubase installation, where they stand in the sort of hierarchy of great tools for professional music production. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a number of different things. First, we're going to talk about can you hear the difference? I'm also going to talk about EQs and compressors. Those are the two areas where a vast majority of mixing gets done, so you've got to make sure you have great tools there. I do want to talk about mastering and talk about the tools that would be used for that, and broadcast levels, how you might go about that. I am going to talk about delay and reverb as well, and give you some tips for how you can work, whether you're working with third-party tools or you're working with your own. I want to offer up some tips and perspective on what really matters there with delays and reverbs. And then the last thing I'm going to just kind of offer my opinion on is orchestral mixing, because orchestral mixing is something I do a lot of. I think it's relatively complicated, and so understanding what you can and can't do with the stock plugins is probably going to be useful to anybody out there producing orchestral music, and I think there's a lot of folks that follow my channel who are doing that. So let's start off with what I'm really talking about when I talk about stock plugins, and just sort of briefly look at an example of premium plugins, okay? So I'm going to take myself off the screen here. Stock plugins, typically the ones that I'm using are inside my channel strip. I'm going to go here into my mixer in Cubase, and I'm going to enable my channel strip right here. And we're going to take a look at that. Channel strip is right here. So if I go ahead for my piano, let's say, and I open this up, what I get is typically a variety of gates, a variety of compressors, EQ, what they call tools, and saturation, as well as limiting. And these are actually available if you go into the channel settings window, which is right here. This is the same thing that you're seeing in the mixer, but this interface just presents it a little differently. This has the advantage of being able to also reorder these if you want to. You can also decide whether or not you want the channel strip to happen before inserts, or vice versa. The default is that strip happens second and inserts happen first, but you can switch that if you want to. So let's just look at, these are the most typical ones that people might use in a signal chain. Noise gate. There's a few different compressors here that have different qualities. I'll talk about that briefly. EQ is very standard, and I think most people in Cubase are using this anyway. A de-esser, envelope shaper, those are kind of rather fringe tools. And then some kind of saturation, as well as limiting or maximizing. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm just going to drag this window over here over my shoulder so that people don't lose track of it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. So the question of can I hear the difference really comes down to what's the programming behind these plugins. Is the programming suitable? Is it attempting to recreate famous devices, that sort of thing? Now, my general experience with the Cubase stock plugins here that come with the channel strip, as well as the laundry list of other plugins that are not part of the channel strip but which do come with Cubase, is that they're very high quality, and I find that the channel strip in particular, especially the EQ and compressor and the limiter, they tend to be very transparent. So there are times when you will hear a difference, but that's because you're looking for the sonic characteristics of a specific device. And it's quite often the case, for example, if you go back to the days of analog boards, that you have engineers who come from that kind of experience, and they'll say up and down, they'll definitely claim that working on those boards is fundamentally better. Now, there's a lot to that. However, I've done both, and my experience and sort of more objective standpoint is this, that whether or not you use specific devices or just specific plugins is less relevant than knowing how to work with them. What are you trying to do with them? So let's say you have a limiter, some sort of classic analog limiter. It's going to have certain properties, right? Maybe it's got a super fast attack. Maybe it's very punchy. Maybe it's very graceful the way that it compresses vocals, something like that, that you can definitely hear the difference. And if you go ahead and you use the tools that are built here in the channel strip, they're designed to be very transparent, and you're going to miss that, right? So if you're listening for it and you're used to it, then these will sound different to you. I think knowing what you're trying to go for is, and understanding the tools that you might want to use is essential, and recognizing that it's not so much, in my opinion, a question of whether these tools are professional. They're undoubtedly adequate and perfectly suitable for any kind of work that you're going to do if you are a competent engineer. If you're not a competent engineer, you don't know how to use an EQ, you don't know how to use a compressor, honestly, spending money on really high-end third-party plugins, premium plugins, is not going to help you. So if you are going to go the third-party route, or there's a specific sound that you want to hear, make sure you know what the sound is, what device it comes from, what its properties are, and you feel confident that you can actually work with a tool before investing in anything. Other than that, I think the channel strip is where you go. Now, I want to make a comment here before I talk about EQ, which is to point out the importance of consistency. Now, I did not use the channel strip for the first several years that I was engineering and mixing and doing that sort of stuff in Cubase. And the reason, I suppose, was I didn't really understand. I was introduced to plugins in the Pro Tools environment, which doesn't really have the same channel strip setup. And so I was used to the idea of, you have plugins, you have inserts, and that's where the effects begin. So you load in a bunch of inserts. That's what happened in Pro Tools. When I came to Cubase, I didn't really come to grips with what the channel strip was. But the benefits of using it, certainly they're professional grade, programming. But also there's this consistency. Now, as I pointed out, you can reorder things in the window. You can change whether the inserts or the strip go first or second. So there's a customization there, but once you customize it, it's very consistent. So if I open up my pianos, I see the same structure. If I open up my strings, I see the same structure. And it's important to recognize that engineers of sort of the old days, one of their big advantages that is a big part of why I think the analog realm is so highly regarded was that they had a relatively limited set of tools, truly. Great tools, granted, but it was always the same circuit. When you sat down at a fancy board, the compressor and the EQ and all of the settings in each channel, they were identical. So there was this confidence that you got to know the board. It was like getting to know a guitar, getting to know a piano. You know where its sweet spot is. You know how to work with it. And that consistency is really important. So if you work with the channel strip, as I do now, the primary benefit of doing that is consistency. You get used to the tools. They're completely pro grade, and I think that that'll benefit you. So I'll get off my soapbox right now and talk a little bit about the EQ. So I'm going to take myself off the screen just so we can look at the EQ. The EQ is so essential to mixing that it actually has its own tab here. It's very easy to use. You can click and drag. You can actually type in values here if you want to go to exactly 200 hertz. You can have any flexibility you want. You can also change the different kinds of curves here. So if you wanted to have a high-pass filter here and you wanted to have a low-pass filter here, you can choose those different types of filters in the EQ. The one thing that I love about this is being able to do comparative EQ. So let's say that I am going to just bring this channel down a little bit. Actually, that's not exactly what I want to do. What I want to do is bring down the whole entire mix. So let me do that, because I want to be able to talk over this as I'm doing it. So I'm going to go to my control room and just bring down this volume. And I want to point out here that when you're looking at the channel settings, you can actually, so right now I'm looking at the channel settings for my flute. Let's go to the keys here. Okay. So I'm going to go to my keys, and let's say that, you know, I want to identify what's going on in the mid-range and the upper mid-range. That's maybe masking, where my keys may be masking the strings, or the strings might be masking the keys. This is a really nice feature built into the channel strip EQ, is that I can observe both. So the frequency spectrum analysis in the background, that's blue, will represent the keys, and the orange will represent the strings. So I can see what's going on, and I can decide that, you know, I want to cut, do a sort of little dip on the keys there, and maybe come here and bring up something like that, you know. So I've got this inverse, and you can actually see on these EQ curves on the mixer that my little band passes are taking effect. So being able to do that sort of work is a really nice advantage of this tool. It doesn't speak directly to the sound quality of the EQ. In my experience, based on having worked with analog gear and having worked with a lot of premium plugins, the EQ here is really great. Now, I do often use a Neutron 4 equalizer, but I only use that. I don't feel like it's better. It does have two features that I prefer, that are the main reason I use it. So this is a premium plugin. This is the kind of thing that you'd have to buy. This is part of iZotope's Neutron package here. And the two things that I find myself using a lot in this, well, actually three. One is the masking feature is really nice. So I can go ahead and I can do the same, but it's the same feature as is in here. But it does give me a little more actionable information. So if I play back here and I want to look at the masking against, let's say, so this is strings high, I want to look at the masking with the EQ, with the keys. You'll see that I'm getting this sort of orangey highlight, and that's telling me where masking is happening, right? So that's an example of what you get with a premium plugin. If there's a feature that really enhances your workflow, that's definitely worth investing in. I started working with Neutron because it speeds up my workflow. For a long time, the channel settings EQ window with being able to do comparative EQ was also speeding up my workflow. This made the unmasking challenge a little easier. Neutron came as a package that I bought where I needed some other tools, so it wasn't that big of an investment. I'm not sure I would have bought it just cold for these features. That's one feature that I use. Another feature that I use in the Neutron is that it will work inside tonal balance, which, as I've shown in other videos, is actually how I prefer to mix my tracks. So this is in strings high. It's the EQ, and if I go ahead here and I select strings high, then I can, sorry, not the relay, but the EQ. You can see this same curve here is presented here, and when I'm playing back the music, I can decide to do all sorts of EQ things, and I can actually see the way that it impacts my overall sonic characteristics of my entire mix. Again, it speeds up the workflow. Is this EQ better than the EQ built into Cubase? In my opinion, no. But it does enhance my workflow. It speeds up my workflow, so that's important. And that's also true of the next topic, which is compressors. Why would I use one compressor over another? Maybe if it has a sonic quality, as I mentioned earlier, that I really am after. If you are finding that there's a specific compressor that maybe has a workflow advantage. But built into the channel strip here, let me get rid of these windows and open up this. So built into the channel strip here, you have a variety of compressors. Standard compressor, which is very transparent. a tube compressor, which definitely has its own characteristics and properties. Whether that's what you want or not, I'm not sure that I can answer that for you. But there are three different compressors here that really represent styles of compression, types of circuitry that people have preferred for different things. So you might use a tube compressor if you wanted to introduce distortion or saturation into the compression signal, that sort of thing. These have different properties as far as response times, attack times, that sort of thing. What the sonic characteristics are of the plugin. So these are great tools. And I think, again, I actually use these compressors over any third party. The gate is really simple, just does what it says. I pretty much only use this. I hardly ever use it, actually, but if I were to use it, I would really only use it on drums. Maybe if I wanted to gate a snare or something like that. EQ, I've talked about. Tools, a de-esser, and an envelope shaper. I don't use these very often, but they're nice to have there. I do use saturation quite a bit. So what is saturation and what would you do with it? First of all, I will say these tools are totally pro grade. They sound great. I also have Trash, which is a great saturation and distortion plugin from iZotope. I love it too. Like the other iZotope plugins, it has features and tools that can enhance my workflow, make me work a little faster, or give me, in the case of that unmasking feature I showed earlier, give me some insights where it helps me make a decision a little more quickly because there's some sort of visual feedback, right? But these saturation plugins built into the channel settings here are really fantastic. Let me take this off the screen so that you have some visibility on that. The limiter here, you have three types. Brick wall limiter is going to be sort of the most severe. It simply does not allow signal beyond a certain point, compared to the standard limiter, which will allow sound, but it's much more strict than a compressor. I tend to use the regular limiter more than the brick wall. And then there's a maximizer. I don't use maximizers in my mixing structure really, because I prefer to mix my levels with compression and EQ and managing the gain staging. I get better results. I feel like the outcome is better, and I very rarely need to max out my levels. Maximizers would come into the game for me if I was doing EDM or something like that, where I need to like max out my dynamic possibilities there, and minimize the dynamic range to extraordinary degrees. Then I have to reach for a maximizer, but generally I'll go for a limiter. So hopefully that helps you understand the EQ and compressors. Mastering and broadcast quality, well, the maximizer kind of leads into that. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of broadcast quality and mastering can you do with stock plugins. Well, the stock plugins that you're most likely to use in mastering that come with Cubase might be a multiband compressor, something like this. Now, Neutron and Ozone, they come with a version of this that's a bit more advanced, has more features and some nice sort of eye candy. But at the end of the day, it's the same idea. You get to divide your frequency response into different ranges and apply compression to those different ranges in order to maybe take control of the bass, but apply different compression to the high mid, something like that. This is a very popular tool in mastering because it gives you frequency-based control. All right, so that's stock plugin number one that I would reach for all the time. Analyzers, I use analyzers all the time, especially Supervision is great. It's got a whole collection of different meters that you can see if you want to see a VU meter, or you want to see a spectrogram, or you want to see how things are shaping up in your stereo field, all that sort of stuff. There are premium plugins that I like as well. I often use Insight here, which again is an iZotope plugin, has really nice graphics for I like this history meter down at the bottom. This tells me what the overall level is relative to a target over time, which I really like because sometimes the beginning of a track is quieter and it builds, and I want to sort of understand how that's progressing. But this also has loudness levels, and I can create any combination of the different tools as well so that I can have an easy to view presentation. So that speaks again to the advantage of premium products, being that they might offer me more visual insights, more eye candy. They might give me the control to either monitor or affect things in combinations or in hierarchies, or sculpt somehow my tools around my workflow a little more precisely. That's usually what I go to the premium tools for. But Supervision, which is a great metering tool built into Cubase Pro, is capable of pretty much everything that I do in Insight over here, pretty much all of that, as well as a few other additional meters, which are pretty handy. I do use Supervision to get PLR, which is a dynamic range measurement. So I would say experiment, and personally, maybe if I was talking to a friend who had just bought Cubase Pro, let's say, and they wanted to know if they needed additional tools, I would say no, and work on your mixes with the tools you have. Do that for 6 months. If after 6 months you really feel like there's something you're missing and you need, by all means buy it. But my guess is you'd come to the conclusion that Cubase has all the tools you need, and they're all really great. They're super flexible and very reliable. The next topic I want to talk about is delay and reverb, and then I'll have some words on orchestral mixing. Delay and reverb, the plugins that come with Cubase are really great. There's a variety of different plugins here, so let's pull up the channel settings, and under inserts here we actually have this whole collection of Neoverb is a third-party plugin, so are the following ones. But Revelation, Reverence, Roomworks, I believe even Shimmer, which is maybe new. I haven't used that very much. But these are all built-in stock plugins. Reverence and Revelation, I believe, are convolution reverbs, and they sound great. Under delays, of course, we've got also a variety. We've got ping pong delays, mono delays, multi-tap delays. Replica here, this is a third-party product, which I do use sometimes, but I mostly use them because I got to know the controls at some point, and I feel like I'm faster with them. But in that case, I know that the delays that come with Cubase are completely adequate, and if they had been the tools that I've been introduced to first, they would be the ones that I reach for. With reverb and delay, and this was true earlier in my comments about EQ and compression, and it goes back to, can you hear a difference in the sound? Is if you don't know how to get the sound you want with reverb, if you don't understand how to develop a pre-delay, how to calculate a pre-delay that's appropriate for your reverb, if you don't understand how to and what would be the steps for setting up a pre-EQ and a post-EQ, so having EQ that maybe does a high-pass filter going into your reverb, but also has maybe a notch in the high mids coming out of your reverb, using EQ in combination with reverb is really essential to getting modern, clean reverb sounds. So if you don't know how to do that, and you go and you buy some really high-end reverb, thinking that you're just going to slap it on, it's going to sound great, you're going to have the same problem you have with EQs and compressors and just about any other plugin, which is your engineering skills are the most crucial. Now, if you're a guitar player, as I am, I've been playing guitar for decades, I know that if I go and I get, a pretty common Fender Squier and some little, $80 amp from the store, and I bring home my package and I jam on it, I might sound all right. If I give that same guitar rig to Eric Clapton, it's going to sound better. Now, it is objectively a lousy guitar and a lousy amp, but it's Eric Clapton, or it's Jeff Beck, or, it's whoever, fill in your favorite guitar player there. So if you have basic tools, but you're a great engineer, you're going to get great results. And you don't need all the eye candy. You don't need all the convenience features, in my opinion. Of course, if you got the resources and you just want to explore, I've done plenty of that, and it's a grand time. If you're limited on resources and you're wondering, yeah, but are my tools holding me back? I would say with Cubase Pro, at least, absolutely not holding you back, not at all. The last thing I will talk about is orchestral mixing. And orchestral mixing can be complicated. In my view, the main thing that's complicated about orchestral mixing is getting the dynamic levels right. I think over the courses of hundreds of years, the combinations of instruments, you know, the viola and the two violin sections, the cello and the basses, they were designed by luthiers to create instruments that sounded really nice together. The way that they sound with the traditional brass section and the traditional percussion, these have been cultivated over time because the orchestra needed to sound great. And, you know, they built fantastic halls and they built fantastic instruments. And over the centuries, they really cultivated something that sounds really great just the way it is. Unlike synthesizers, for example, which I find I have to carve and manipulate to a great degree, especially if I can't even imagine, you think of an orchestra, you think of having maybe 17, 20 different kinds of instruments. If I had 17, 20 different kinds of synthesizers in the same track, it would be a lot of heavy lifting to just cut and trim and force those instruments to sound good together. But with the orchestra, they sound pretty balanced already right out of the box. If you get great samples, that is 95% of the experience. However, when you have all these instruments, you find that the violin sounds great and the violas sound great and the French horns sound great, but when you put them all together, suddenly your master's clipping, right? Very quickly the orchestra gets out of hand in terms of dynamics, in terms of amplitude, and suddenly you can't hear the flutes anymore because the French horns and the trumpets are blowing over them. So controlling dynamics, which is the job of compression, and to a certain degree EQ, are going to be the main tools in mixing with orchestra. And as I've said in the earlier sections, I believe that the EQ and the compression here built into Cubase, certainly Cubase Pro, I think the channel settings, channel strip is the same on all versions of Cubase, but it's fantastic. It's totally adequate and up to the job. So if you're mixing orchestral music and wondering if the tools built into the channel strip are okay, in my opinion, they are. Okay, so if you have questions about anything I've said, if you have constructive advice, something you think I should know that I don't know about these things, please post in the comments. I am just sharing based on my experience and my opinions. I know I'm wading into dangerous territory, claiming to have answers to these questions because I'm putting this out on the internet, and sometimes people get a little crazy about their ideas about, you know, what the best plugin is or what the best compressor was or whatever. Please know that I'm just trying to offer up my perspective, but if you have questions that I can answer, please do post them in the comments. I appreciate everybody's support. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. It helps me greatly surface these videos, and then honestly is one of the things that encourages me to keep making them. Thanks again. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I should see you live again on Monday at noon. Thanks. Bye.